I think if you look at how the United States has dealt with China since 2017, when Donald Trump jettisoned the policy of engagement and moved the United States towards a policy of containment. If you look at how we have behaved since then, I think it is remarkably similar to how the policymakers in the United States reacted to the Soviet Union as a threat in Europe after 1945. I don't think that those policymakers who were in charge in the late 40s and early 50s were right at every turn. I think by and large, they did an excellent job of containing the Soviet Union. They created NATO, they built the necessary military forces to contain the Soviet Union. And as I said before, they avoided a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union in Europe, which would have been a total disaster. So they did a fine job, but not a perfect job. And I think if you look at the United States since 2017, there surely have been some bumps along the road. But I think by and large, the United States has done a good job of dealing with China. And I think we will continue to do a good job. Ukraine and Russia is a very different issue. I tend to think that had the policymakers who were in charge in the late 40s and early 50s been around when we were getting deeper and deeper into Ukraine, they would have avoided it. And we would not be in the mess that we're in today. I think it's very important to understand that China is a much greater threat to the United States than Russia is. And in a world like that, it's most important that the United States pivot fully to Asia and not get bogged down in a war in Eastern Europe that matters little for the strategic balance of power. Right. And furthermore, from an American point of view, from a realist point of view, you want the Russians on your side against the Chinese. You don't want to drive the Russians into the arms of the Chinese. Remember, you have three great powers in the present system: the United States, China, and Russia. And in a world where you're the United States and your principal rival is China, you want the Russians on your side of the ledger. But the Ukraine war has pushed the Russians into the arms of the Chinese, and it's made it very difficult for the United States to pivot fully to Asia, to deal with its principal rival. And to give you an example, John, that I think illustrates the problem here, in the early part of the Cold War, as you well remember, the United States had both China and the Soviet Union as adversaries. What we did, starting in 1972 under President Nixon, was we peeled the Chinese off from the Soviets, and the Chinese became allies of the United States against the Soviet Union. That made eminently good strategic sense. And what we should have done long before 1972 was work to have decent relations with the Chinese, so we didn't help to push the Chinese and the Russians, or Chinese and the Soviets, closer together. So that's my basic thinking about Ukraine, which I tend to look at in a very different way than American policy towards China since 2017.